Hi there, I'm Abby. I'm with LDV Capital. We're a venture capital firm investing in people building visual technology businesses. We thrive in collaborating with deep technical teams that leverage computer vision, machine learning, and artificial intelligence in order to analyze visual data. This is our series, The Women Leading Visual Tech. The purpose of the series is to highlight some of the top ladies whose work in visual technologies are revolutionizing business and society. In this interview, I have the pleasure of chatting with Carol Reiley. She's a serial entrepreneur and a computer scientist with the nickname Mother of Robots. Her 18 years of academic expertise and industry experience lie in artificial intelligence and robotics, with applications in medical space, space exploration, disaster rescue, and much more. Carol is the first female engineer to ever appear on the cover of Make magazine, and she's listed as a top female businesswoman by Forbes, Inc., and Quartz. She's recently co-founded a healthcare startup, which is still in stealth mode, but we'll try to get some details. And previously, she worked for Intuitive Surgical, Lockheed Martin, and General Electric. As an entrepreneur, she co-founded Drive.ai, a startup that managed to raise over $77 million, grew from an 8-person company to 180 employees over 4 years, and was acquired by Apple. Carol is a creative advisor and collaborator for the San Francisco Symphony, a brand spokesmodel for Guerlain Cosmetics, and she's also the published author of a children's book, Making a Splash, in addition to her dozens of scientific publications and 8+ patents. I hope that you enjoy this conversation with Carol as much as I did. Enjoy. So Carol, it's great to talk with you today. Thanks so much for making time to chat.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I'm honored to help share, and you guys put together some great questions and have had some great interviews out so far.
Thanks so much. All right, so to start it off, you have so many different roles, whether that's collaborator for the San Francisco Symphony, the mother of robots, and a daughter. What do you answer to the question, who are you? How do you prioritize all these different roles in your life?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. I think, like most people, everyone's multifaceted, and there's just a huge amount of balance. And it's almost like you have all these balls in the air to keep yourself entertained. So I would say that, whatever gets top priority is mainly my daughter, because she's yelling and screaming. But I would say that, it's wherever I feel most needed and where I feel like I could be uniquely qualified to solve something. So I don't start a startup, for instance, just because I want to. It's because I find something that is a problem that I feel that, maybe I can actually solve this, and my background gives me the tools to start something. So really, like, that's the thing. Yeah, and my background, my formal education is as an AI roboticist, and I've done a few companies, so I call myself an entrepreneur. But I think we just keep learning, and I just move on to new things that seem to have huge potential for growth and learning, and where I feel like there's a problem that I see that hasn't quite been solved yet, that we are there and can actually solve it right now. So.
That's fantastic. You're always looking for the pain points that you can solve for. Mm-hmm. Exciting. But where did your fascination with robots actually start?
So I was not one of those geeky kids that was coding since I was 5. I didn't quite know what I wanted to be growing up. I thought maybe a doctor. I really wanted to help people and do something meaningful, impactful, and interact with people. But I would say that my first hack or experience with engineering came when we lost our pet hamster at age 8. And so my dad is an engineer, and for my science fair project, we actually had jerry-rigged a safe mousetrap where we put it down and put peanut butter, and it would actually catch the mouse, as opposed to, because there's nothing on the market that we could buy to actually help us catch and not kill our pet. So we caught it, and I think that was the first time I realized that engineering is actually cool. It's not just about going in a garage or sitting in front of a computer, but you could actually help solve a problem. And that got me interested in engineering. And it wasn't until my freshman year of college that I chose robotics. I had won a full scholarship, and they made me choose a research project. And since I'd never done engineering at all, I thought robotics sounded cool. And I did not know that would lead into a full career, because that wasn't a career back in like early 2000s. So my advice to young adults is just to, keep yourself open to constantly learn, and your job might not exist yet, and you might invent the job that you want in the future.
Very cool. Yeah, when you decided to study robotics, how many other women were in those classes with you at that point?
That's a great question. I went to Santa Clara University, and I would say that robotics on the whole actually has more women in that discipline than like electrical engineering or civil engineering or computer science even, because it's so interdisciplinary, and I think there's such a practical application. There's so many strong applications to it. So for instance, in my lab, there were almost 50% women, and I think maybe that was one of the reasons I was drawn to it. It was in the mechanical, like I've been kind of like a computer scientist hidden underneath a mechanical engineer, because I majored in computer science, and my background is in coding, but I hung out in robotics labs, which are mainly mechanical engineering. And I think robotics lab, because it touches so many different skill sets, it's generally a very collaborative environment. You work together to build things. There's electrical engineers who are doing the wiring, computer scientists to code it, mechanicals to to put the motors and actuators together. It could be one person. It could be a multiple people. It could be a hybrid. You just have to do what needs to get done for the job to work. And so
that's great.
And besides all that, yeah.
It was one of the reasons why you felt comfortable getting into the space is because you had so many other fantastic women who are also interested in varying aspects of it.
Yeah, so to answer your question, I think that there's definitely more women in the lab. My master's advisor was actually like a really amazing, Dr. Allison Okamura was like amazing researcher and like badass woman in general, and she was so kind. And so she actually, so just I would say that just having inspirational role models really affects the whole tone and the culture of a center. And then in grad school, like we were lucky because we were all under this umbrella. There's about 80 graduate students with multiple advisors, so you can kind of like collaborate between labs. So it wasn't very lonely at all. It was the most fun time of my life. So it was
fantastic. What about in the current state of robotics and AI today? Are there any examples of something that's really fascinating for you that people are working on?
Oh, yeah. Yes. I think I feel like we're undergoing that fourth industrial revolution right now. So, everything in AI and robotics, which has been, people have been researching it since like 50s, 80s, for decades. But just recently has really burst into more of the mainstream. So while it used to be a very niche field of just a few researchers, a few hundred of us gathered together for conferences, now you've got this explosion of everyone outside of school and companies also working on it. Just to name a few, I'm really interested in robotics in healthcare. So I used to work at Intuitive Surgical, which is a teleoperated surgical system. So a doctor would sit on one end of the room and the patient would be on the other. So you've got lots of issues with latency and like hand tremor reduction. So it helps a surgeon become like a super surgeon. So that whole area is very interesting. Self-driving cars is another that has really just, really taken a lot of headlines into the last
I'm gonna put you on the spot. When are we gonna be buying our first autonomous vehicles?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different types of business models, and consumer vehicles I don't think are anywhere close to being there. I feel like it's your first experience with a self-driving vehicle is going to be more for public transportation, for like buses or taxis. So you would not own it. And why would you want to own a car that sits in a garage or in a parking spot for like 22, 23 hours out of the day anyways right now? So it could be a highly utilized vehicle. So I believe the future of cars is going to be dispersed and, it'd be shared ownership. So maybe never. Yeah.
Fantastic. I like that answer. Yeah, we think about it a lot in terms of, is it actually going to carry people or is it going to carry goods first? And so it's always interesting to see. So, kind of talking about autonomous vehicles, tell me about starting up your first company.
Oh, so Drive was actually my fourth company.
Fourth company, okay.
Yeah. You want to hear about starting Drive?
Yeah, tell me about starting Drive. Like, how did you decide it was the right time to get into it and to begin building in the space?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I was doing my research in surgical robotics, my co-graduate work there, and I actually spent a year. I went to Johns Hopkins. I actually spent a year at Stanford with my advisor, who was on sabbatical and had spent it out at Stanford. And I was actually in Sebastian Thrun's lab for the year, sitting there with his students who were all who had just won the Urban Grand Challenge. So they were all self-driving car folk. And I thought it was really cool. I mean, I used to, like I got demo rides. I thought it was a cool, fun project. And Sebastian is, had, really started the whole, he started Google X and then like all of this. So yeah, in my mind, I was like, this is cool, but I don't, I work on surgical robotics, like it saves lives. Like it's, self-driving cars seemed, it wasn't the right time. And this was back in 2008. I came back to the Bay Area in 2011, and things had changed at that point. There was this whole breakthrough in deep learning. So AI had definitely leveled up. Google Brain had started. The self-driving car projects had turned more serious. It felt like an interesting time, and I had all this background in like regulatory product development and bringing out like surgical instruments which needed all this FDA approval. So, like it was a very hairy area to get a regulated product out. And so there was a group out in Stanford who specialized in AI and deep learning, and they had never, most of them had never worked before, and then a lot of them had, never started a company. So, it was so I met with them and gave them advice, just on like how do you, think about the legal issues. Here's how you would incorporate, just answering any questions. I think they were bringing in a lot of different experts at the time just to chat with them and figure it out. And I think everyone was on the fence of like, should I start a company? So for really 8 months, they were back and forth, and then it was really like, this has to happen or it's not going to happen, right? Like, because kids are graduating, everyone's sitting on Google offers, and like every week someone's quitting. So basically, I put money and did the seed funding for the company. We got a deal with NVIDIA to donate like all the GPUs. Wow. It was as easy, yeah. So they were incredibly generous. We basically made it as easy as possible, and it was like, who has the guts to start it? We need to go, or it's not going to happen. And so we just incorporated, we moved it, and then talked to the people who were interested to go, and we started. And it was, there's 8 of us, and it was hard, right? Because you're sitting, and I got us free office space in this Chinese incubator. So we sat there, we had a whole row, and yeah, and that was how the company started. And it was great because then the 8 of them were like great friends, and there was definitely a camaraderie and an understanding of what needed to get built and done, and everyone had their specialty. Joined me also from like not in the lab was a COO who had been a very seasoned president of a publicly traded company. So he came in with a lot of experience to help answer questions, figure out what needed to get done. So that's how Drive had started.
So it seems like there's like a lot of, it being your 4th company, and it seems like you have a lot of connections already in the space in order to get you free workspace and all these other kinds of things that can be really imperative at the onset. Were there any critical lessons learned that you had from your past experience that you brought in order to help overcome so many of these hurdles and obstacles that we know stand in the way of startups at the earliest stages, especially in a huge industry like autonomous vehicles?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, every company is unique and there's just a lot of logistical things that need to get done to move. I think I was lucky. I wouldn't say it even came from my old experiences, but just I think I had friends in Silicon Valley who had started companies. So a lot of times it was like I didn't know what I was doing either because I hadn't done it in like the Silicon Valley style. So I read like crazy, and then a lot of them was just like calls to friends to be like, can I crash with you guys? Like, what would you do? Or like, what should we do now? So I think having like people who have done it before or reading blogs really helped a lot just to move quickly, to just get the boring stuff just settled so that they don't, because you don't want to spend like 3 months finding the perfect office space, because some people prioritize like a really cool office, and we were just like it, like you just have to finish it and move, like just get it done. And I think we realized
like having that like brain trust around you of advisors, like whether that's, an advisor on your company or an advisor who's a friend or your father who's an engineer, like having those people around you that you trust is going to be incredibly important to your journey.
Yes, I would definitely say that it is good to at least have, if to have a mentor, you've seen someone do it who has, because I feel like to start a startup, some of the logistics are the same for the same company. The uniqueness is the problem you're actually trying to solve. So don't spend that much time on office space because everyone's done it, like just get that done. But like what we knew was special at that time, because I mean, if you flash back to 2014, 15, like there wasn't a space for autonomous cars. We got shot down by 33 VCs in Silicon Valley who said, you guys are way too smart of a team to be working on too dumb of a problem. Like self-driving cars is not going to happen. And so it's very different than like a year later when like everyone's throwing money at self-driving cars. So when we went out for our Series A, we had these top sandhill VCs tell us like, can you pivot to drones? Like, like that would be more interesting. So, it's
interesting.
yeah. So things change.
You guys are lucky you only had 33 VCs turn you down instead of like 330 or 3,330. Because there's so many people out there who have like these stories of literally it takes talking to 500 people in order to get a single investment in, especially in some of like the the things that are thought of as being science fiction at the moment that ultimately, end up becoming mainstream or more commoditized.
And it is disheartening because you hear these stories of people who like only pitched for like one person and got it, so you hear all these miracle stories. So even for us at 33, our team was like, what is wrong with, what's wrong with us? But I think every person has a just different experiences, and it's like dating, right? Sometimes people meet the one the first time, and sometimes it takes a while.
So what about like as you were running Drive or in all of your entrepreneurial experiences, can you tell me about one of the hardest decisions that you've ever had to make as a founder, and maybe how you relied on your brain trust in order to help you make that decision?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say that there's a ton of hard decisions along the way, and you never know if you're right or wrong. This one's pretty personal. I would say that probably the hardest decision I had to make was actually choosing to leave the company. This was 4 years in, and we had fundamental leadership issues that I didn't agree with, and I would say that we had 8 co-founders, and there's a lot of voices and there's a lot of groupthink, and most of them, like I mentioned, hadn't worked before. So there's a lot of things about culture, or fairness, or that I felt strongly for. And one of the big decisions, the last decision, that like really it was that I didn't believe in like selling the company, right? Like I don't start a company to sell it. And when that decision was made, when it was a group discussion, and we like that was something I didn't agree with, and I really wanted to help the company. So when the decision on the founders was to sell, I respected the decision, and I stood on the board and was helping them toward that transition, which took us like a good year 2 years, because we had inbound offers from the first month that we started the company. So there was always like offers to buy the company. But like you do need co-founders to commit, and I completely like that. That is a very hard decision. It's a very personal decision, and I wouldn't want to do anything to hurt the company. So I would say like leaving the company and doing that for us in a delicate, graceful way was extremely important. I think so. I would say that was probably the hardest decision, was to do that.
Well, and that sounds like a great learning experience for you too, to understand that that's a pretty critical question to ask of your co-founders at the onset. Is, and it's actually one that we ask a lot in our due diligence process. It's like, how much money would you sell this for? If somebody walked in and offered you $50 million tomorrow, would you take it? And different people have different responses, because everybody's got different personal circumstances or goals with what they're doing. But ultimately, if you're looking to build a business that's going to improve the way that the world works, ultimately having a goal of an M&A isn't necessarily what you want to be shooting for all the time.
Yeah, and so I would say that was definitely one, and you need founders to have be all aligned on these type of big issues from the start.
Yeah. And so is that something that like you kind of took with you as you went forward and started to look at founding new companies? Is that now a question that you always ask of your co-founders or potential co-founders?
Oh, like that's an interesting one. That's not a question I ask. I would say that this, for my current company, the one I started after Drive, it was actually the company I was going to start prior to Drive, because I hadn't originally. Yeah, so I had actually had that idea. I was actually starting to work on that, my current startup, and when Drive came along, it was just the timing was right. Like I could see self-driving cars was going to be huge. I actually saw it as a way to do preventative medicine to save lives because of so many car accidents. So in my mind, that was actually a really impactful way to save people. So it aligned with my mission. Like once I saw it in that light, and also as the first robot out in the wild, like then I became very excited about the idea. But in the back burner, there was always this, like I was dying to start this company I'm starting, because this was like my calling, and I was like, oh man, like so for the last 4 years, it's been in my mind to start it. So after I left Drive, it was immediate to jump to this to do this startup.
That's exciting. I never really made that connection before. Like, what's the connection between surgical robotics and autonomous vehicles? But it makes sense. Saving people's lives and making, being preventative of injury seems like that's a huge connection. I don't know why I haven't made that before, but really interesting.
Yeah, it's the number one leading cause of death among young adults today. So that's just crazy, because it happens so often.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually one of the things that I talk about with my mom, who's obsessed with COVID at the moment, is about how, like getting in your car and driving down the street to go to the grocery store is actually a much bigger risk than going into the grocery store and potentially catching COVID.
And I'll throw something else out at you too, because, even you getting in an Uber, like think about how dangerous that is, because you have no idea about the driving record behind like your Uber driver. Like number of accidents.
How friendly they are, but that's about it.
Exactly. And so I would say that like for people who are scared of self-driving cars, you have the whole history of the car and how safe it would be like visible to you. So I would say it would be much safer than trusting the human. Humans are prone to error, and it's extremely dangerous. So
well, do you think, does that same thing carry over now into surgical robotics? Like you went to work for Intuitive, the market leader in the surgical robotics space. Would you feel more comfortable getting operated on by a robotic surgeon or by a person?
Good question. I would say that for surgical, for surgeons who use the Da Vinci robot regularly and have those skills up to date, I would definitely trust the Da Vinci way more. It's got perks like hand tremor reduction, magnified views. It can scale up and down your motion. So there's just a lot more accuracy and precision that supplements the human. So the surgeon is still in full control. So I believe in, like collaborative robotics. So a human and a robot working together based on their strengths. Because, a robot never gets tired and has 360 views, or it can enhance, like our own limitations. So, and I think all that complements a human. So I'm not asking for automated surgery. I'm looking to have a surgeon be in control, but human weaknesses would get supplemented. And I always say that robotics makes us like superhuman. So if you can give us, almost like X-ray vision, like the Da Vinci has, you can put a dye in there and it gives you basically X-ray night view. So it's very interesting, things that we can't see with our natural biological limitations. Robotics and AI can help address. So those are the type of things I'm interested in.
That's really exciting. Yeah, every year we write a report where we do a deep dive into a sector that's ripe for disruption via visual technologies. And 2 years ago, we actually wrote it on the healthcare space, where we looked at Intuitive and a bunch of others in the surgical space. And that's ultimately what we found too, is that there's things like the amount of time that you can be in surgery, which can be, 15, 20 hours, depending on what you're doing in some instances, right? And understanding that there's a better way to do it, and having some assistance in order to make sure that it's pretty, it's much better from a safety perspective, is one of the big things that was a finding of ours. It's interesting.
Yeah, and I would say that one area, like when you asked the question, what is an interesting area in AI and robotics? One area that I've never touched, but that I'm extremely fascinated for, is like AI and robotics for the food industry. I think, especially in the time of COVID, having all that automated and like very clean and sterile, and fast and cheaper. I would say that, people sometimes don't want to work minimum wage jobs at the fast food industries, but just increasing the quality of it's just a fascinating new area that I think could be very
yeah, it's funny that you say that, because we're actually our report this summer that we're working on at the moment, and we're going to publish relatively soon, is all about food and agriculture, and looking at where there's visual technologies in food and ag, and the opportunity to make food safer and produce enough to feed the entire world.
Yeah, that's a great trend. And then I would say that on the AI side, the area that I'm interested in exploring now that I've joined the Symphony, is really AI in the arts. So, seeing where AI can help artists be more creative and free them up. Just like how a computer, you might think it might, take away some jobs, but I would say that like a computer has been tremendously helpful for all of us doing our jobs and communicating. So I would say that, not a lot of thought has been given into where can technology help artists, and how do artists help define what the future of music or, painting, where it all goes. So that's an area, an intersection that I'm extremely interested in. And AI has style transfer techniques. So like if you train on one data set, can it transfer into something that's parallel? Cool. So I'm really interested in those type of methods.
Yeah, actually, I remember that when I must have been like 8 or 9 when my parents got me a program for my keyboard where you could literally like play a song into it and it would automatically transcribe it on a sheet of music. And I thought that was just the coolest thing ever, because up until then, if you ever wanted to write something down, it was coloring in the notes, and that was as like an 8-year-old. So I can only imagine how, as a composer, your workflows can be improved enormously by the advent of AI. Cool. So, being at Intuitive, and I know that you've recently co-founded a new startup in the healthcare space. Why did you decide to pursue your own company as opposed to deciding to be an entrepreneur at a company like Intuitive?
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about the experience of working at a company. And Intuitive is not a huge company. I think it was like 3,000 people when I was there around 2011. So I think there's a lot of experiences that you can have, a lot of mentors you can gain from working at a strong company. There's a culture that's defined, and processes that are in place that you just don't appreciate unless you're starting your own company and you realize you're lacking just the simple workflows, or how does something get escalated. So I would recommend for every entrepreneur to have, one, probably worked at a large company to learn what is good about that. Also, to work a service job, I think, is also important for every person, and then also to take an ethics class. So it's kind of like three like different learnings I would say that every
that service job and the ethics class might overlap.
um, but you know, I worked at Lockheed Martin. I was an intern at General Electric. So it was great to see what these large companies had built and how people did things. And also I had a strong passion for regulatory spaces for some reason, like launching a satellite requires a multi-decade long project. You know, I would say that there was nothing, I wouldn't have been opposed to being an entrepreneur. It just like the ideas for the companies I wanted to found weren't similar. You know, like self-driving cars is a very different space. My current healthcare company is more in women's health, and it's not surgical, so it's also very different. So, yeah, so I
with what they're building or what their suite of services are at the moment, anyways.
Yeah. So you know, I would it wouldn't fit, but I would say that if you know a good place to start that is safe, that provides funding and resources, if you're unsure about taking the full step out to be, is it called like an entrepreneur, an entrepreneur, like a traditional entrepreneur, is to like try being an entrepreneur at your company, or like a in residence, you know, at a bigger company could be a way to get resources and figure it out, and so you won't be so lonely too. Because I think that the path of an entrepreneur can be lonely if, yeah.
That's absolutely true. You know, talking about loneliness, right, and like your first hires. Are there anything that you specifically look for with those first hires for your team in order to help you, you know, build a resilient business and start out on the right track, especially when you're getting involved in highly regulated industries in the way that you have been?
Yeah. So I would say that one of my like favorite interview questions to just toss in at the end is for a candidate to like describe their personality. And I think it catches people off guard because a lot of people are very good at interviewing and have like practiced all the questions and are prepared for, you know, it's like the SATs, but like, I don't think there's a right or wrong with, you know, describing your personality. I think that helps me determine how to manage a person by understanding like their self-awareness and something I might not have picked up on if it's traits that and values that are important to them. So really trying to figure out how to manage a person and their personality fit and culture is one way to assess, and that question is one way to figure that out. The second is for me to know my own strengths and weaknesses and what I can do and can't do, and then try to find people that help round out the team. Because when you are small and scrappy, everyone is hustling, everyone's trying to do whatever their skill set can do, and you don't sometimes like you don't want too much of the same skill and a huge gap somewhere else, so you need everyone to be covering the bases. So I would say having strong vision and goals aligned early on is also a third thing. And you know, for instance, one thing I know about myself is that I'm very good with a high level of ambiguity. So for me, I'm like, oh, we don't know this and we don't know this. It's fine, we'll figure it out and we'll just keep going. And that can be very disarming. Like that can be scary for a lot of people, right? If I know that they are like, you know, they need the order, they need the steps. If there's a change, it needs to be communicated. Like those things are very, very important for me to know up front. And it's also important for them to know what type of person I am, so that I don't like that doesn't scare them, or that we know how to work with each other. So yeah, but generally I look for hustle, integrity, and then really like distance traveled. So where they started from, and like what they've had to work through as opposed to were given. So, you know, just because you went to Stanford and computer science, like that doesn't mean that much to me. You know, I'm like, great, like, yeah. What else? Like,
well, trick interview question that I'm going to throw in at the next one is describe your personality and see what would you give as a piece of advice to women from technical backgrounds who are interested in starting up their own business?
Ooh, you know, sometimes like just having like worked with female entrepreneurs, like I do investing. I'm also part of Allraise and part of their like mentor program. Like I've noticed that a lot of technical female entrepreneurs just they overthink it, you know, like like there's just, it's good to have hesitation. It's great to talk it through and know the risks. At some point, like you reach the end of the line and you just have to decide, and there's a huge amount of risks, and no one knows until you take that next step and then things become clearer. So I would say try, as hard as it is, try not to overthink it. Do think heavily about it, but then like at some point you're out of the questions, you've talked to the same people, everyone, you've reached the end of all the advice, and you have to just make that call. So that's definitely one piece of advice.
At some point in time, you just have to jump. Like, you know, it's one of those things that I remember learning when I got out of undergrad, is that there's no right and wrong. Like when you come from this environment where there's always a right answer. And so you either got the right answer, you got the wrong answer, then all of a sudden you emerge into this world where it's all gray area. So you kind of just have to like trust yourself at some point in time, do as much background as you can, and then, you know, jump.
Yeah. And if you make the mistake, then it's, the thing that matters is like how quickly you can adjust and slide, you know, like, because I feel like sometimes you get down and you want to stick with that decision. You know, sometimes it's good just to like let go and try to figure out how do you correct and move into the other direction. The second thing I've noticed, this might not just, it's not like just female technical founders, but just people in general, it's just to have the hard conversations up front. Because I think a lot of times when I'm chatting with them, they're like, well, my co-founder and I, we haven't talked about equity and our roles, and you know, like the longer you wait, the more invested in time you've given, and both of you guys have different expectations. So it is probably to your advantage, to everyone's advantage, to talk upfront about what you need, what you want, and then make an agreement at that point so that it would be fair going on. It's not like, you know, like a year down the road, like your co-founder is going to see you in a different light. You know, if anything, you probably lose your leverage as you put more time in. So it's good to figure out if it to just kind of have some of those hard conversations up front.
That's great. Yeah, I guess, you know, in some ways, as you get married, it'd be like getting married but never having the discussion whether you want kids or not, right? And there's people who have that issue too. That's great.
Yeah, and time is a most precious commodity, I would say. So that's the thing. You have to move fast.
For sure. Time is definitely our most precious commodity, especially when you get into small companies, right? Everything has to move at lightning speed, and there's not enough time in the day to get it all done. And so prioritize, right? All right, so one question that we wrap up all of our interviews with is, if computers didn't exist, what would your career choice have been?
So, you know, one piece of advice I got from a graduate school professor had been to change careers every 10 years. So like he believed in just to always be learning and growing, I think was the general tone of the advice, and not to be scared to start over again. So, you know, I've taken that advice to heart, and I think because of technology moving so fast, it's been less than 10 years that I've done these career changes on things that excite me. If computers did not exist, you know, it would definitely be something highly creative, and it would be something that I felt would help people. So, you know, it might be in the healthcare space still. It might be like, you know, writing books by candlelight. So so an electrician. Maybe I want to be the one to help invent the computer if it didn't exist yet. Yeah. I don't know. My answer is like, I don't know. It could be anything. So it's.
Yeah, I forgot to mention, I ordered Make a Splash on Amazon today, your children's book. I looked and I was like, oh, this is perfect. I definitely want this, and so it should be coming in the next couple of days.
Oh, thank you.
I'm really excited about it.
I enjoy it. Yeah, it's good for kids to think in probably like ages 5 and up. So it'll be
little early, but still, she'll like it right now. Well, that's fantastic. We really appreciate you taking the time to chat and share some advice that you've had, and some of the guidance that you give to female founders and founders in general as they move down the process of starting up their own company, based on the experiences that you've had with Drive.ai and all of the other phenomenal work that you do across the board. Really inspiring to learn that, you know, that idea of creating value and helping people is at the core of everything that you've done throughout your career, and I appreciate you sharing.
Thank you for your time. Thanks for inviting me. It was fun.
Absolutely. Bye, Carol.